Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight's show is called Providence, and we're going to be exploring that concept and bringing information which I hope will be useful to you. Interestingly, I was just outside before I got in to do this, and it's pretty dark out there, but you can still see, and a bat came swooping towards me, and I thought it was going to hit me, so I got out of the way, but the bat knew exactly what it was doing. That kind of ties into what we're going to be talking about. And we're talking about the stuff that we've been talking about in the Perfected Mindfield series. And we're going to be talking, as I said tonight, about providence and right action. So the views of the crowd, as we know, if we've been listening and looking around us, are artificially imposed. And most people will say they have their own minds. Well, being captive, of course, is hard to admit to. They let an imposed system speak through them and for them. The worldview, then, is a constructed norm which is adapted to different genetics. Perception can be managed, of course, through imposed beliefs, group identity, etc., all of which restricts knowledge. Other weapons against higher perception are drugs and alcohol. There is nothing more attuned than the highest intelligence. Distortions in the field may be insightful, but they are illusionary. The imposed worldview is a set of principles, views and beliefs which dictate behavioural response. People are apparently 95% visual, and the remaining 5% is left for touch, taste, hearing and smell. So the imposed worldview comes about through what is seen, mostly. A word together with an image, of course, equals a concept. It becomes a reality within the mind, even if the two are not necessarily connected. And of course, in its simplest form, this is useful for advertising. On a more important level, it is used in religion, and it is also used in television. Of course, when we see a so-called documentary, they will merely put images on there to implant what is being said, whether this is true or not. Of course, an example of that would be David Attenborough and his BBC documentaries. The pictures are absolutely wonderful of the Earth, but put together with his narration, it means something else. There's propaganda underneath the pictures. The pictures are of just nature. They are naturally occurring things, then edited together in a sequence to create a narrative. And that's what we have to be careful of. What are we actually seeing? So what is seen consciously goes into the unconscious. This can pollute the worldview through repetitive programming. And we see that all the time. When one is fully conscious and not subject to images from screens, then the unconscious is where the most useful information is actually stored. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this evening's show, along with quite a few things. So when we see this, the imposed worldview comes about through what is seen, and it goes into the unconscious, and this is where the most important information is stored. The unconscious can be brought to the surface, of course, and the lessons it teaches can be absorbed into what is called conscious action, and this is very, very important. And when we look at this, we see that apart from where it is the most important information, the unconscious can be brought to the surface and the lessons it teaches can be absorbed into conscious action. It is therefore necessary to be fully conscious, as useless and negative information can be stored and become part of your conscious action. This, of course, happens when people have negative experiences which they process in the unconscious. And it takes years to them to get rid of this, and it takes a long time for it to come to the surface. And when it comes to the surface, we see this in what we perceive as self-destructive or negative action. That is merely this negative unconscious stuff coming to the surface. And during sleep, this is the most important thing, it is believed that processing of these ingested images and information actually takes place. If things are working properly, the information in the subconscious can be the most powerful, as it prioritises what actions actually need to be taken. If interpreted, of course, without bias, this drives you to the necessary action for required or wished for outcomes. And we're going to be getting into that as the show goes along, and how this works for and against the individual. So the need comes not from desire. Everyone has desires, don't they? But this is what, for instance, Hinduism calls karma. It is actually action driven by desire. This is why there is talk of both good and bad karma as a result of desires transmuted into action. Therefore, karma is not a passive approach. It is through action that these things happen, for good or bad. And remember, we always have choice. That is the point. So this is actually below the field of intelligence, correctly called providence, when actions are in line with unfolding reality and it's unfolding in real time. Have you ever experienced an objective coming true with no need for interference or strife? This is when the goal was part of a line of action which some would say was predetermined. Now, we're not talking about what has become described in the word fate. It is merely an outcome that was aligned with the natural order at the right time. You become attuned. You were using all subconscious correct information along with correct use of the conscious senses, and a naturally occurring sequence of events unfolded. So it seems that if your deeply held convictions are working alongside the highest intelligence or God, then your dreams can literally come true. If one thing interrupts this field, it can and will go wrong. This is why people are controlled with all sorts of false belief and, of course, distractions. And this, I think, is a very, very important thing. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about deeply held convictions that work along the highest intelligence or God, which literally makes these dreams or necessary actions come true. And this is why people are controlled with all sorts of false belief and distraction, because they misinterpret what this is actually about. That's what seems to be the case after years of looking at it. This includes the New Age idea of manifesting. It comes from an I want this to happen approach. And I've observed that this leads to delusions and problems arising from misinterpretation of what is actually going on. So this, I think, is very, very important. So basically, in other words, something can just ruin the party. In other words, this is what happens when New Agers start to manifest things around you. It happened recently with one of these New Agers imposing some bad information. I could see it was bad information, and they were introducing someone who is merely a conduit for ego-driven drivel. And we've talked about this in lots of previous shows, and I knew instantly that this was merely an interruption in the field. It sounded like an interruption. The way the voice was expressing itself of this person over the phone was entirely at odds with what seemed to be natural. And I learned this basically through trial and error of experience. So it was clear that this was ego-driven and ill-considered. This is what they were trying to inject into the information field. I could hear it in the voice of the person imposing it. So the highest level of governance, or God, seems to speak through life's circumstances, but not everyone listens. Including me, of course. I mean, this is the point, that it's an ongoing process, and to attune this and perfect it is a lifelong experience, a lifelong learning experience. And that's why I've put this particular show in with what we call the Perfected Mind Field series, because it's an exploration of reality. And it's all about learning. So you never stop learning. You can never go, oh, I know how it works now. You have to be constantly aware, because things are constantly going to come into your path. This is the nature of the reality that is being imposed on us, because there is this idea that the priest class, or in other words, this group who people call elite, who are not elite, they're not really elite thinkers. They've just got a plan and they're sticking to it. But they know about human interactions and human psychology. That's the word that they use to describe it all, of course. So the negatives that happen to you merely prove you're doing something wrong. And that might go against your desires. You may think, yeah, but I wanted this. But did you need it? So if trouble like this comes into your field, you have to correct it on your own. And the highest governing intelligence, or God, will not interfere, because it's outside the true information field, and not aligned. Therefore, it is outside the system, and the system has no interest or control over it. And this, I think, is a very useful and practical way of seeing it. So, many people believe, or say they believe, let's start this again. Many people say they believe in God. They do not say they believe God. This is where intermediaries and interlopers come in and redirect proper action into different and not so useful outcomes. And we've been talking about this in many recent shows over the past 5 years. This way that people are being steered and led like donkeys, and they think it's through their own volition, when in fact it's to their detriment. So alongside all this, there is the belief in duality. And it leads to the mind trap of going beyond what they call duality. And this duality is on the lower spectrum and used for the purposes of control in a controlling system. It is below the system of divine governance, or appears to be. It is used to direct people into passivity and acquiescence. And we see that in a lot of religions. It is a false premise from the start. It seems to result in endless word salads and excuses. And according to popular interpretation, that which comes up as the consensus view on the internet, here we're going to get to it, the word providence, as described in the consensus view that we're meant to accept. Providence is the guardianship and care provided by a deity or God. Religious people thank their God for his providence. Is this description inadequate? Yes. It says a deity or a God. It talks of a personal God as in your God. Providence cannot in reality be non-specific. Something happens or it doesn't. Nothing could happen purely because of a belief in something personal. I'll just repeat that because I think it's quite an important one, this. Something happens or it doesn't. Nothing can happen purely because of a belief in something personal. So once we get into looking inwardly at ourselves, we've lost the plot, literally. So let's have another look at another description of providence. Traditional theism holds that God is the creator of heaven and earth, and that all that occurs in the universe takes place under divine providence, that is, under God's sovereign guidance and control. It carries on. According to believers, God governs creation as a loving father working for all things good. Well, this is the elite construct of and for simple minds. Many things happen on earth that are not because of God's providence. Most things happening right now are outside God's providence. The manufactured reality used for the governance of people is outside this natural order. That's where people make the mistake. They say, why would God let this happen? Well, God didn't let it happen. It was outside the governing system that we're talking about. So the question why God let this happen is a nonsense. It's a false premise. It misses the point. So the events on the planet happen. Certain events on the planet happen. Natural events are part of the all-encompassing system which has its own balances. This can then be perceived as allowing disasters to happen. Well, they are called natural disasters. Why are they called natural disasters? Because they are natural events which affect people who may also die. Some people have an ability to avoid them. Some people will be in the right place at the right time. This is providence. They received a warning, consciously or unconsciously doesn't matter. So natural disasters are not from God, but from specific localized events caused by nature. They are disruption in the field, which is catalyzed by certain specifics, which are all naturally occurring. This has nothing to do with God or providence. However, those who escape these situations may use the word providence as there is no proof against it. No one can prove that they did not attune themselves to some divine intervention. It cannot be disproved. This is the dichotomy of this imposed type of thinking. They say there is no proof of the existence of God. What do they mean by God, and what do they mean by proof? Usually, an argument along the tired old lines of, well, if there was a God, why would God let this happen? The argument against is dead from the start, as they are trying to talk about something within their own experience and indoctrination, something which is nothing to do with a governing system called God. When it is said that providence or belief in a benevolent force is known as God, is this accurate? So when it's stated that providence or belief in this benevolent force known as God, is this accurate? Not if they are aligning providence with deities or gods. So the word God has become denominational and channeled into belief systems. This is done through the promotion of images. This is third-party interference for the purposes of governance and control. Those that know the bigger picture have put a barrier in the way. It is called organised religion. Well, who organised it? When we look carefully at the organisation of religion, it has only the purposes of governance. It is third-party interference into the field. Those that know how to control have studied behaviour patterns. That is all they know. That is what makes up so-called elite thinking. Elite here is the wrong use of the word, of course. It would better be described as prediction through pattern recognition and human behaviour. Do people believe in a certain way? Yes, most actually do. If people believe in something, they will consent to its governance over them. And this is the purpose of deities. For example, a statue seen every day imprints itself on the conscious. Then it becomes part of the unconscious, the subconscious. The statue has a set of governing principles. Most people have heard of the deity Shiva, who is also known as the destroyer within the Trimurti, which is the Hindu trinity, which also includes Brahma and Vishnu. In the Shivite tradition, Shiva is the supreme lord who creates, protects and transforms the universe. He's also the excuse for bad human behaviour. In actual fact, Shiva is the supreme lord who creates, protects and transforms the universe. Well, Shiva does none of these things. Every day for a year of my life I saw these deities. A special event known as Shivaratri is a group celebration. It is fun. It brings people together. People allow themselves to smoke marijuana. They set fires in the street. They sacrifice animals by burning them to death. And they get together in groups. And often they're quite noisy. Is this what God wants? No. It is the belief in a deity and outside the governing system of the universe. However, God does not stop them from doing it. It is outside all of the governing natural order principles, which people are missing by taking part in this group activity. Well, I visited many statues and temples. Nothing I saw aligned to anything except a very controlled aspect of a belief system. And I talked about this in depth to many people that I knew who were very much a part of this system from birth. So the stories of the deities become complex. Their interaction with each other is in the main symbolic, and it is used as a form of philosophy. But mainly, it comes into robotic belief every day. They will touch a statue. They will light incense around it. They will look at the principles that this statue exudes, and they will start to exude those principles and believe in them. So there are examples of this type of deity all over the world. I mean, Buddha is also just an image, of course. The teachings may have some interest and often reflect simple ideological and philosophical dilemmas, as in the Mahabharata and the Hindu texts, which are very interesting. They put people into positions where they have to take a course of action, which leads to what we call karma. So these are very fascinating and we can learn from them. But are they the highest governing system? No. The description we cited also states, according to believers, well, what do these believers actually believe? A belief in deities which has nothing to do with divine intelligence. That's what we seem to be talking about. So what is divine intelligence? It is the system under which organic life on Earth actually operates, an all-encompassing system which has accommodated everything on the planet. The intelligence which the sentient beings on planet Earth are all part of, and whether those living as humans are aware of the information field is said to be down to belief. Well, this is the distraction. When something beyond what one believes is true, it is obviously outside the person's belief system. So, having said all that, I'm going to have a very quick break. Been going 20 minutes there, pretty much breakneck speed. So let's have a short break. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm finding this subject very fascinating because it's a way of learning. In other words, if you listen back to this show, you might pick things out and go, that makes sense. That's what this whole idea was about. When I started getting into a series called The Protocols of Power, trying to put down how things actually work, take away the belief systems that are imposed and look at how things actually seem to work, which is what we're taken away from in all forms of media, which is why I broke away from what a lot of people call alternative media, because all they're talking about is a news cycle, or they're talking about things that actually won't work. And this is repetitive and it becomes habitual. And once you step out of it, you see that it is indeed arrested development. It is going round in circles endlessly and never seeing beyond what is actually being imposed. Because, of course, there is a system and everything that people are led to is part of that system. The only way you can get out of that is to think beyond it. So we're talking about the system under which organic life on Earth operates, the all-encompassing system which has accommodated everything on the planet, the intelligence which the sentient are part of. Whether those living as humans are aware of the information field is said to be down to belief. This seems to be a distraction. When something beyond what one believes is true is obviously outside the person's belief system. Something can be true despite belief. And that is one of the biggest revelations that we can have. When something outside our belief system happens to be true and we didn't know about it, that's called learning. So in this case of supreme natural order governance we're talking about, it is not true because of the ignorance of the person only. So what is outside manufactured experience? What does manufactured experience mean? It is the culmination of what you have been led to believe. So are deities part of the all-encompassing system? In this manufactured reality of a system, statues of deities exist as material objects. The system has, of course, accommodated them. Are they divine? No, they are deities. Images with stories attached is what they are, and the stories explain their divinity. The statue on its own does nothing. There have been stories of statues of the Virgin Mary, for example, crying, and Hindu statues producing milk. Now, I have had an experience of this, of a Virgin Mary statue which I photographed, and the photographs were so weird and anomalous that even an expert in photography said this is impossible, the camera shouldn't have done that, because what was behind it was in focus, and what you seem to have captured is nothing to do with how the statue looked. And this happened several times. Now, I think people are led to put statues and deities into the wrong places. And I say that for a reason, because this particular place where this Virgin Mary statue had been obviously doused by Franciscan monks many years previously. And the experiences that a friend of mine had there were not particularly good, but they were definitely supernatural. Nothing really good came out of it, and the questions that I asked at this particular spot were not really answered. So I think all of this can be a distraction, and people are actually directed with bad subconscious ideas to put these things in particular places, which further obfuscate the real direct intelligence. I think it's all part of the program, of the plan, without getting too esoteric. So we have to ask what message they are conveying. Is this of any use except to those who believe in the power of material deities? It is known that supernatural events do happen, but are these beneficial, or are they produced by negative entities who just happen to be around? Well, only we know this, and the more we get into this groupthink around deities and gods, then the further it seems we get away from it. And this must always be questioned and balanced between positive and negative. Is anything revealed or learned? The manufactured description of a deity, let's get onto this. A deity or god is a supernatural being considered to be sacred and worthy of worship due to having authority over the universe, nature, or human life. The Oxford Dictionary defines deity as a god or goddess or anything revered as divine. So, basically, this is subjective. We're talking about something that is believed to be divine, and it's just an object. So the object represents something that is divine, and the divinity comes through the object. So the use of the word divine when describing an image is wrong. The image was created from the imagination. Do deities have authority over the universe? No. Do deities have authority over human life? Yes, if one accepts they do. That's something worth thinking about. This is how deities can be used as conduits for control, and even supernatural control. This is what they mean by belief. So what is considered sacred? Well, deities are considered sacred. People have particular deities for particular aspects of experience or governance. These can be used for any excuse until a deity or image is subjectively compared to what experience a person is having at a particular time. In other words, the deities in time form the patterns of a person's life. They attribute positive experience to their belief in a deity. This is an image they hold in their mind. If there is a negative happening, then this is a lesson they have to learn, because they say that the deity needs them to learn this lesson. But this negative experience could have been avoided. Deities can be seen as part of the all-encompassing system. They play roles in a reality, and they become seen as the receivers of information. It is believed then that the all-encompassing intelligence inhabits these images. Are these images God? They can be described as gods, certainly. Aspects of the greater intelligence. Well, is this true? Are they aspects of the greater intelligence? If one believes it to be true, then it becomes subjectively true and real. So the belief in the power of a deity can make the deity real. When it becomes real, it is part of a system of organisation and control. So, is this why deities were created? It appears to be. Having studied deities for a very long time and the position of where the deities are within what we call a city or a community, the positioning of them is very important. It's usually where people gather. Deities of all types encompass concepts of intelligence. They are only part of reality through belief. They can drive certain aspects of human behaviour, however, which is why they are used. In groups at temples, this can create what are called egregores. Group entities are created through the power of the thought group, acting in unison through instruction or a set of rules. A breaking off from reality of the already present field into unconscious behaviour and beliefs then occurs. That is why religion has rituals. The ritual may be empty and robotic, but the group belief drives behaviour change amongst themselves. They conform to a recognised norm. They become self-governing through a group of accepted principles that are accepted, of course, by all in the group as norms in society, societal norms. This can be directed by a third-party priest or guru. This third party is an intermediary. Can they be trusted? They should not be trusted as they are not your direct connection. How do you know they have any connection to anything at all? Those who are not aware of a connection use these intermediaries, however. The priest is there to control behaviour through a set of beliefs. They are trained in the written word. They are gatekeepers for authority. This is how the witch doctor gains power, often through fear of retribution of people questioning their power. People become afraid to step outside of these imposed norms for fear of retribution, or in reality, for fear of the unknown. This has nothing to do with how the universe appears to govern. It is how people are controlled and nothing more. So, what is Providence? What is Providence? Yeah, let's get into that. When they say the guardianship and care provided by a deity or God, or how religious people thank their God for his providence. Well, I think we've just covered that, haven't we? It is not contained in that sentence what we've been talking about. Nothing of what we've talked about in this show is contained in that sentence when we're talking about providence. I'll read it again. The guardianship and care provided by a deity or God, or how religious people thank their God for his providence. Okay. It is not contained in that sentence. Why? Because there is an underlying intelligence which they are not mentioning. This is to make sure that you concentrate not on God as an all-encompassing super system, but as a deity, a thing to be worshipped and thanked. Well, this is a very simple control system. It prevents those under the priesthood from realizing that alignment with the superior governing system makes their actions work productively. It seems that many things have to be in place before this can happen, and then providence appears. This is because most things get in the way of it. Will and reason are below this governing system or God. If will is aligned with providence, then everything flows normally and goes in a beneficial direction, or seems to. That's the best way I can explain it. If will is imposed on providence, then continual friction will occur. Progress will be made, but as they say, one step forward, two steps back. It will inevitably end in exhaustion or struggle. And there is actually no need for this. This is known as life struggle. It creates the need to exhort yourself and exert more will over reality. This distorts the information field, and what is known as God cannot then be present. Let's get on to the current belief system, the one still being used. The full title of Darwin's Origin of Species was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. This was a management concept and nothing more. It's telling you that there is a struggle for life on Earth. The conceptual ideas in the book are not based on nature. The assumptions made are from the perspective of someone who believes in a system. That system, called survival of the fittest, is inaccurate and, at the base level, ludicrous. Look around you. The preservation of favoured races. Where? Who favours certain races? Well, social engineers who work against nature in order to define and control it do this. These concepts, such as evolution, have kept a large percentage in arrested development, which was their purpose, and it worked very well. It has put them under self-monitoring control. It keeps them away from providence, therefore they see life as a struggle and act accordingly. This is where the term rat race comes from. Rats do not fight over nothing in real life. Neither are they involved in a race to get anywhere. They coexist and are self-governing as a group according to impulse and basic necessity. They are constantly hungry, and this is why they are operating in the system that they do. The race is a distraction. Certain elements of it, for humans, are part of necessity, of course, such as food and shelter. So when people say God will provide, often they are talking about things which are not necessary. This is the distraction. This is the materialist distraction. The more distractions, the less important central core issues become, because the distractions take over, and reality, the true reality, is obfuscated. And it only comes in certain moments, and people go, wow, that was a lucky escape, or things like that. Priorities diffuse, and the belief in God becomes a part of a constructed system which manages the individual through groupthink concepts. Sometimes unexplainable things happen, of course, as we said, outside this imposed belief system. If these are not analysed, they cannot become part of providence. They are just things that happen in a broken view of life. You've heard people say, a funny thing happened, or I can't explain it, but... These are the responses of the disconnected to things that are happening which could be beneficial to them. When in tune with the all-encompassing governance, these things are quietly accepted, and there's no need to talk about them. In fact, the more people talk about things like this, the less providence they get in their real life. It should be on an unconscious level that we absorb this information and go, well, that worked. Maybe I could learn something from this. But they can, however, be brought up as examples to underpin what we're talking about here. In other words, well, how do you explain this then? Such experiences are in fact normal. It is the abnormal which prevents them from being seen as part of something bigger and indeed normal. This abnormality is the imposed system of a self-appointed and, of course, self-anointed priesthood. Well, many believe that in recent times this goes back to the priesthood of ancient Egypt. This priesthood, however, must have been present in other places. It was not the pharaohs in control. They were just a front for the elites. The priesthood, also known as Vratsis in Egypt, knew about the all-encompassing governance, but they chose to impose a system which gave them control. Hence we have this term mystery schools and this constant searching amongst the rubble and the word salad for meaning, which is entirely unnecessary and was created exactly for that purpose. Those who carried out their instructions were given specific knowledge to their roles in this system. This can be explained within a pyramid divided into 3 parts. A small capstone at the top containing the elite thinkers and all knowledge they had accumulated. This, of course, is not the entirety of all knowledge. It is merely the entirety of their knowledge, but they used it to control what was below them. This is anti-God. A second tier below were the administrators and priests of this system, which was imposed through this elite at the top, but not really the top, just it is perceived as being the top. And then the larger section at the bottom, underneath the administrative section or the priesthood, are the majority as serfs to the 2 groups above them. If we are knowingly or unknowingly within the control of these 2 top tiers, then we cannot say providence exists in our lives. Neither can we deny it to exist, however. That's the important thing. We can still not deny providence to be in existence. Providence is knowing a direct connection exists and that all impediments to it can be swept away. This is, however, a massive job and outside the reality of most people. And I'm not saying anything here like grandstanding, like this is how it all works. I'm just putting forward thoughts which may help in aligning oneself with this system. And of course, it has to be done from the personal aspect. So I'm only reiterating things which I've learned which appear to be true. And I had this argument, not an argument, a debate with somebody today who kept bringing me back to, well, this, how do you know this is true? I said, well, there seems to be a plan going on where certain things happen, and then you seem to be able to predict why these things happen. It's not because of anything supernatural. It's because there is a plan of governance in place. Once one understands how a plan of governance works, then one can predict what happens. And it got into much more esoteric things, and it came back to things which could not be proven. And I think in the end, this person who was trying to really start a constructive argument had to rethink what they'd said. And it was a very interesting moment. So that's what these shows are all about, really. So it is a massive job, and it's outside the reality of most people, but it doesn't have to be outside your reality. And it's not outside their reality because it is beyond them, but because they've put it beyond themselves. The traps the elite have made have been injected into all religious belief systems. The priesthood are the guardians, but they themselves do not have this knowledge. They do not have this higher knowledge. That's the way things are operating on the planet at the moment. There is a so-called elite who are not elite. The elite, a real elite, would be laughing at them. So the priesthood are the guardians, but they themselves do not have this knowledge. Only the real elite know this. Well, what are the elite? Let us define, first of all, what they are not. The elite are not those who are steering governance systems in the world. These people are merely parasites who operate at a certain materialistic level which brings results. But they work from the basis of the unseen. And the unseen then manifests itself in the seen, the real and the stated goals. The goals that are stated are not the real goals. They are the goals that the public believe. Their system is deceptive because they are deceiving you into believing that what they are doing is in some way correct. But it's only merely to keep a control system going in their favour. So they know ultimately that this will never work. This is why they are called Luciferian, because they are arrogantly stating they have as much knowledge as the highest creator. But they are merely knowingly contracted through a belief system to carry out certain plans. They rule only through manipulating people into consent through a cover story which people think is either necessary or beneficial. Very simple. The people believe this big lie. Through a lifetime of indoctrination leading to accepted norms, they fall into line without question. They want you to choose a side and become its hostage. This is called the two lies. The two lies are part of one big lie, which they then split into two. Therefore, they construct choices. Communism versus capitalism. Planned economy over free market economy. Atheism over organised religion. Always false premises and part of the one big lie split into two for the purposes of choose your side. Which side are you on? Which side of the debate are you on? This is how television operates. This is how television debates operate. They operate between the two lies. They put the public between the two lies. Which side are you on? Choose one now. You have to choose one or our system becomes unmanageable. Our system is actually under threat without the two lies. So in order to keep governance on Earth under control, the two lies are imposed from the one lie. So the one lie splits into two and becomes two lies, and you argue over the two lies. This is the purpose of all the controlled media, to keep the two lies going. If you do not believe in either lie, there is another category, conspiracy theory. This is used when one lie is about to be exposed. We see this happening all the time. So people will be attacked before they say something, and they will say it's a conspiracy theory. Or you're repeating Putin propaganda because we're in the West, and they still keep the old Iron Curtain story going, even though we are led to believe that communism actually was discarded. It was never really discarded because it wasn't used in the way that people believe. In the first place, it was still an elite governing system. And then people say, well, communism wasn't imposed properly. Yes, it was. It was an elite governing system masquerading as something else. And people like Marx and Engels were the people who carried this out. And the so-called elite thinkers accepted this. Hence, we get the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution. And we know who's behind that. It's the curtain, which we should know by now. And if we do not know it, it may be too late for people who are still unaware of that, because we're at quite a late stage. But there is still time. So, because there is resistance to natural balance through indoctrination spread through the entire population, God, or the all-encompassing natural order of governance, is nowhere to be seen. It is not seen in the two lies. So we have to go above the two lies. This is why people say there is no proof of God's existence. This is only because they have lazily accepted that it is outside their experience and not had the awareness to notice any of it amongst the endless distraction. Their experience has been tailored to everything which is outside the natural governance. It is useful and in the long term necessary to regain this form of divine governance, as it is the only system that is reliable. It is the system which underpins everything. It takes some discipline to reject what is unnecessary. It is the highest achievement to align with the highest intelligence, as it contains all necessary information. And I'm going to leave it there because that is a lot of information. And I think the show has been quite long enough. All of these concepts that I'm talking about have been very much considered, and I've tried to put them across in the simplest form possible, because truth is simplicity, and simplicity is truth. So, I hope you enjoyed that, and do keep the information coming in through the website info@windowsontheworld.net. Do support the show. You can do that on the homepage at Windows on the World, or email me at info@windowsontheworld.net.